There are worlds where silence is not absence but law, where every sound is measured, weighed, and pressed beneath the iron hand of order. In such a place, laughter has no home. The stones themselves seem to hold their breath, and the air carries only the aching weight of things unsaid. Mist crawls over forgotten ruins, curling like memory across shattered arches. Within a vast, dim hall, the kind where whispers are swallowed whole and die before they are born, she existed. Small, voiceless, almost unreal. For years, she sat unseen at the edge of sight, a shadow among shadows. To look at her was to look at nothing, and so the world trained itself not to look. Her silence became a cautionary tale told to restless children. Be good, or become like her, soundless, useless, forgotten. But though they mocked, though they cast her into nothingness, she endured. What they missed in their cruelty was the way her eyes flickered when the torches bent low, the way her gaze carried something unbroken, a secret too carefully hidden. She never spoke, never sang, never even coughed when smoke drifted through the halls. And yet, at times, her breath paused, as if the shadow of a smile lingered on lips she would not lift. It was not joy, not defiance, merely restraint, the faint ghost of something ancient, waiting. To the crowd of the living, she was dust on the floor, a figure so unimportant she became part of the architecture. They passed her with jeers, with careless laughter meant to wound. They called her hollow, called her vessel, called her fool. And she listened. Not once did sound return from her throat. Not once did she yield them the cruel pleasure of a reaction. Generations came to believe that silence was all she was, that silence was all she would ever be. But the truth was never silence. The truth was waiting, and that waiting would one day end. For fate does not remain still, even in the frozen halls of forgotten lives. And within her, behind the restraint, behind the heavy mask of voiceless years, something gathered. It was subtle, invisible even to her own awareness, like the gathering storm before a sky cracks open. The watchers of fate would later claim it had always been there, that spark, that ember, pressed down beneath the weight of centuries, biding its time. Those who scorned her could not know how fragile the order they adored truly was. They could not know that the least sound from the least person could undo an entire kingdom. Yet it was so. And so she sat in silence, while pillars trembled faintly as though the earth remembered what mortals forgot. One day, when all eyes were upon her, a voice would break the endless hush. One day, in front of those who had scorned and dismissed her, a single human would speak. And then, against every law of their world, the impossible would happen. She laughed. Before we begin, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. The world around her was not kind, nor was it silent. Outside the dim halls where she lingered, the empire roared with ritual and tradition. Bells marked the hours. Drums summoned the faithful. Trumpets heralded rulers who walked in procession with garments brighter than the sun. And voices thundered across the forums, declaring law, decree, destiny. Here sound was power. To speak was to command. To be heard was to exist. And so, what was she? A ghost adrift in a nation drunk on its own noise. The rulers traced their lineage back to an age where laughter itself was outlawed. They believed joy created disorder, chaos, rebellion against structure. Their society was founded upon strict cadence, speeches that were memorized, oaths recited without flaw, debates conducted like war. Even silence itself was not freedom, it was dictated, granted, measured. Men and women could fall into moments of quiet if ritual demanded it. But spontaneous silence? That was suspect. That was weakness. Thus, she became their living punishment. A reminder that one could lose voice, lose esteem, lose name itself. Children were herded through the halls where she sat motionless. And there they were told cruelly, "See her? If you waste your chances, if you defy the rhythms of speech, you will end as nothing as she has." Some lowered their eyes. Others laughed nervously, mimicking her stillness, wagging their heads in mockery until the teachers barked out approval. Everywhere around her, the empire bloomed with spectacle. Festivals blazed with torches, minstrels shouted songs written to glorify the throne, and markets resounded with the endless bargaining of sellers and buyers. Meanwhile, she was a shadow sitting at the edge of pillars, dust settling softly along her shoulders, as though marking her with the very passing of forgotten time. And yet, she was always there, always watching. Those who mocked her never wondered why the rulers permitted her presence in the sacred halls. They never questioned why she was not expelled, nor why her seat was never taken, though no one else desired it. They only saw weakness. They only saw humiliation. To them, she was fabric of ridicule, a living ornament to prove that silence is nothing, that endurance is meaningless, that those who fail to speak in power are erased. But perception bends easily when truth is hidden. The truth was, they feared her. Not openly, not consciously, but somewhere in the marrow of tradition. She reminded them of something ancient, too old to be remembered clearly, too dangerous to be spoken aloud. With each passing generation, that memory blurred, until she simply became the mute figure at the edge of sight. Yet still, her presence was ordered into place, never removed, never destroyed. The world grew full of voices stronger, sharper, crueler. Orators rose to power by their ability to stir crowds into frenzy. Judges rained down verdicts like storms from high balconies. Commanders barked strategies through endless wars. And through every age, she remained, unmoved, undiminished by ridicule. To the people, she was less than history. To history, she was less than dust. Only the faint flicker in her eyes betrayed the truth that silence is not absent. Silence is the veil of waiting, and yet all waiting has an end. When the mockery reached its height, when those who believed themselves secure in endless sound had forgotten caution, the first faint crack in power stirred. It was invisible, intangible, but certain. For as long as she had sat unseen, the world had been moving toward a single moment, a single word, a single voice strong enough or foolish enough to address her. The crowd thought they mocked her, but in truth they heralded her. And soon, a figure would arrive who would make the entire empire fall still. And then he came. The day began as countless others had, a procession of voices flooding the imperial hall, each one demanding to be heard, each one swelling with its own importance. Yet even among the cacophony of rule and ritual, the truth was clear. Anticipation had been building for weeks. Rumors had flown like restless birds across the empire. A figure was coming, one unlike the rest. On that day, the torches seemed to burn brighter. Thick incense coiled through cavernous rafters, and the people gathered shoulder to shoulder, packed so tightly they breathed each other's fear. The floor of polished stone trembled faintly before the sound of marching boots. At the edge of the great chamber, the doors opened, not with creak nor stumble, but with a thunderous release of weight, as though the world itself was permitting entry. He stepped through. A leader? A challenger? A stranger cloaked in foreign colors? To some he looked like salvation, to others threat. But to all, he was movement in a land that prided itself on its immovable silence. Cloaked in garments of deep crimson and shadows that clung like armor, he carried no procession of words before him. He walked alone, and the sound of his boots striking stone carried farther than the declaration of magistrates. The crowd hushed. Mothers silenced children with trembling hands. Even the appointed heralds, men trained to fill voids with endless proclamations, faltered into stunned stillness. It was as if the very air leaned in to hear what his presence would mean. He crossed the length of the hall, his steps steady, unhurried. As he neared the throne, something flickered across his gaze, something others missed in their awe. His eyes swept the crowd, past the armored officials, ignored the gilded tapestries, and stopped. They stopped upon her. It was not a glance of curiosity, nor the dismissing glance so many cast upon her frail figure. No, his gaze lingered, measured, noticing what had gone unnoticed for generations. The crowd followed his line of sight and saw nothing worth their attention, just the silent one, hunched in dust and shadow, faceless as ever. Some chuckled quietly, embarrassed on his behalf, as though he had mistaken shadow for substance. But he did not turn away. He advanced closer, passing by those who believed themselves the center of all dominion, until at last he stood not before the throne, but before her. The laughter stilled, replaced by confusion, even dread. What was he doing? Why here? Why her? Then, without fanfare, without announcement, he spoke. The words themselves are unremembered. Some claim they were a riddle. Others insist they were nothing but a simple greeting, common as dust. Yet what mattered was not the content, but the impossible weight of a voice offered to someone who had lived years without being addressed. And for the first time, her head lifted. The faint flicker moved across her eyes once more, sharper now, glimmering like the reflection of light on hidden steel. She did not answer. She did not need to, for something had stirred in the silence, something so small it seemed negligible. And yet, in that instant, the empire shifted. She had been acknowledged. The crowd tried to dismiss it, tried to laugh away the absurdity of a stranger dignifying her existence with a word. But laughter tasted different now, bitter, uneasy. A tremor had begun. For though no sound had escaped her lips that day, soon, very soon, the impossible would follow. The silence that followed his words was heavier than any storm. For a moment the hall seemed carved from stone, every breath suspended, every figure frozen in disbelief. No one remembered the last time she had been acknowledged. No one dared imagine it could matter. Yet the stranger had shifted centuries of contempt with the simple weight of his recognition. And contempt, when unsettled, always seeks violence. From atop the dais, voices stirred, offended, indignant. Nobles murmured that such folly could not stand. Officials whispered that tradition itself had been mocked. And then, from the throne's shadow, the overseer of trials stepped forward. He was known for his cruelty, a man who reminded the nation that mercy was weakness and failure entertainment. In his long hands he carried the authority to break reputations, and he had a new victim. His eyes gleamed with venom as he regarded her. If she is to be spoken to, the gesture implied, then let her be tested. The crowd roared in approval. Some laughed nervously, eager to see her destroyed before this foreign figure who dared give weight to dust. And thus the challenge was declared. Not a duel of blade, not a contest of strength. It would be crueler, subtler. The overseer was a master of riddles, of puzzles woven from threads of forgotten lore, designed to break the spirit. Even princes had failed his questions. He asked them now of the voiceless one. The hall leaned in. The first riddle unfurled like smoke, a question woven of stars and time, of how many nights a wanderer must walk to find dawn when the sun itself has vanished. Complex, the kind that left scholars in paralysis, the kind that drew laughter from the crowd as they awaited her inevitable collapse. For how could one who had never spoken answer? How could she solve what kings had stumbled upon? But the years of silence had not been emptiness. In her stillness, she had watched the passing of stars. She had counted nights while the world ignored her, heard the rustle of seasons, the tilt of wind in abandoned gardens. Where others sought complexity, she had seen truth unveiled in repetition. Where others clothed answers in ornament, she had learned the elegance of simplicity. Her hand, frail but unwavering, lifted. On the cold stone floor beside her, she drew a single line. 1. The overseer frowned, mocked, twisted his mouth to sneer. But the hall did not move. They waited. She steadied her hand, and slowly, patiently, she drew a circle. The crowd murmured. Torches flickered as though the air itself quickened. She had spoken not in sound, but in sign, and every soul there understood. The answer was not countless steps, nor infinite wanderings. It was one eternal turning, the circle of time itself. Dawn would always return, no matter how it strayed. The truth rested not in calculation, but in inevitability. A gasp tore through the chamber. Then silence again, deeper than before. Children clutched parents' arms. Officials glanced to one another, shaken, unsettled. And in a rare moment, the overseer faltered. He had not expected comprehension. He had demanded humiliation. Instead, he received revelation. The stranger smiled faintly. The throne shifted uneasily. And the crowd did not know whether to laugh or to tremble. She, the disregarded one, had answered. Not with words, not with voice, but with clarity. The impossible had been done, and still she had not laughed. This was only the beginning, and the overseer's pride could not let it stand. Fury swelled in his gaze, masked by mocking restraint. His hand twitched as he gathered himself once more. If she could unravel a puzzle of stars, then she would be crushed beneath something greater. The first trial had not ended her, but the second would, or so they believed. The overseer's pride had been wounded, and wounds such as his do not heal quietly. They fester, they demand correction, they hunger for vengeance disguised as order. To the gathered crowd, his smile was controlled, but his hands trembled with the barely concealed fury of a man undone by one he had already declared worthless. He lifted his arms, his voice thundering through the chamber. One test is chance, one act of luck. Let her face something greater. Let her face the weight of history itself. The watchers roared their approval. The overseer was a master at spectacle. He knew how to bind their fear into allegiance. And so he conjured a challenge from the vaults of forbidden knowledge, a test no commoner had ever seen. Servants hurried to bring forth ancient relics, tablets carved in languages long dead, fragments of law whose meanings had puzzled courts for generations. Upon them was inscribed the legacy of their ancestors, fractured and veiled. Even scholars bent beneath the burden of these mysteries. How could she, voiceless and forgotten, ever endure such trial? The crowd leaned eagerly forward, confident this second ordeal would break her. Many whispered snide remarks, assuring one another that her earlier success was nothing but a fluke. Now she would be silenced completely. The overseer bent low, his eyes glittering. He demanded the interpretation of a forgotten decree, one that had haunted judges for centuries. Was it law? Was it prophecy? Was it contradiction woven into stone? He spat the question at her like venom, daring her to falter. The torchlight swam across the cold walls as silence fell, suffocating, endless. All eyes locked on her frail figure, waiting for collapse. Yet still she neither spoke nor wavered. Her fingers brushed the stone tablet before her, feeling the worn grooves where symbols lay deep. Symbols that to most seemed meaningless, but not to her. The world had forgotten her long before, and forgotten things speak most clearly to one who lives in their company. She traced along the inscriptions, those broken half-phrases that had bewildered the empire's brightest minds. Slowly, methodically, she laid the fragments together as one might piece shattered glass until the whole picture gleamed once more. A gesture here, a drawn line there, not elaborate, not adorned, merely precise. Her silence was no void but a mirror of clarity, reflecting meaning where none dared search. What she gave them was simple. The decree carved in ages past was neither law nor contradiction. It was instruction, not for rulers but for the people. A reminder that the throne draws its power not from decree, but from those who endure beneath it. Her insight cracked the chamber open. Murmurs rippled like storm winds. Some gasped, others fell still as the weight of her discovery hit them. The overseer jaw tightened, for he knew in that moment the unthinkable had occurred. The mute, the mocked, the discarded had completed what his highest scholars had failed for centuries. The ruler upon the throne shifted uneasily, brows furrowed, lips tightening in thought. Something within him faltered. If she was right, and every heart present felt the echo of truth in her gestures, then the great foundation of their dominion had been revealed as fragile, flawed, incomplete. The crowd no longer laughed. There was no mockery now. They leaned in, hushed, awestruck, unable to decide whether terror or wonder should claim them. The sound of her silence was louder than their shouts could ever hope to be. The overseer tried to disguise his fear with theatrical ridicule. He raised his arms again, speaking of trickery, of deceit, of unholy chance. But his voice cracked at the edges, and the crowd heard it. For the first time, his power trembled in the sight of those he had controlled through performance. And she merely lowered her hand, the faintest spark glimmering behind her eyes. Not triumph, not arrogance, but something far purer. The withheld ember waited within her still. The second trial was meant to destroy her. Instead, it revealed the fault lines of the world entire. And though she remained voiceless, the air itself whispered, if she can unmake two trials, what can she unmake next? Every gaze turned now, not to the overseer, but to her. And among them, one set of eyes, those of the ruler himself, burned with a question he had not dared ask in years. They thought the trials were nearly over. They had only just begun. The chamber had grown restless. The crowd that once jeered now murmured with unease, their certainties unraveling, their pillars of tradition trembling. Twice she had been tested. Twice she had endured. And each time her silence, once a mark of scorn, had spoken louder than armies, louder than emperors, louder than the overseer's thunderous decree. And then, someone remembered. It began as a whisper in the shadow of the galleries, quickly drowned, yet lingering. A fragment of a story, a tale so old it had been stripped from official records, carried only by mother's hushed tones and half-forbidden song. A legend of the silent one. The murmur grew louder. Faces turned. The words spread like oil upon still water. The rulers shifted uneasily on their thrones. The legend returned. Long ago, before the empire, before law calcified into chains, it was said there lived a figure who laughed once and remade the world. The Silent One, guardian of truth against deception, bearer of a pause so complete it revealed what even words could not say. The tale had been suppressed, dismissed as myth. To remember it was treason, to believe it was madness. And yet, here she was. The overseer raged, spitting denials, his voice cracking with too much force. But denials cannot smother memory. Memory is flame. When air touches it, it grows. The people began to look upon her differently, not with disdain, not with pity, but with reverence edged with fear. Could it be her? Could she be the heir to the forgotten covenant, that when silence endured beyond generations, laughter would return and topple false power? The ruler himself leaned forward on his throne, his face pale beneath the golden circlet, his eyes locked upon her. He, too, knew the words of the ancient prophecy. He, too, had been nurtured on that same dread tale as a child. Unlike the crowd, he had not forgotten. He had hidden it away with deliberate cruelty. And now, to see it standing before him, small and slight yet unbreakable, it was like meeting a shadow he had buried with his own hands. Her silence had never been weakness. It was covenant. It was bond. She was not simply endured. She was chosen. And though she had not yet spoken, though her laughter had not yet rung free, the air was alive with certainty. The legend was not dead. The prophecy breathed again. The overseer turned pale beneath his fury. He saw what the others saw, the unraveling of order, the collapse of his dominion. And he knew at once, if she was allowed to rise, if she was allowed to endure one moment more, laughter would break chains older than the empire itself. But even he, with all his malice, could not halt the tide of recognition sweeping across the chamber. Truth had emerged. The mockery of years, the humiliation carved into her existence, the contempt painted on her silence, all of it had become revelation. She was not the weakness they claimed. She was the fulcrum upon which their entire world balanced. Her eyes lifted, and in their flicker the hall trembled as though the prophecy itself had looked through them. And the people, once so eager to jeer, felt the air thicken around them like the pause before thunder breaks. The overseer stepped forward again, determined to crush what had been revealed. But deep down, all knew, no matter the trial he set, no matter the punishment devised, what had been hidden was hidden no longer. The overseer could no longer contain himself. Recognition had slipped beyond his grasp, and prophecy had risen like smoke from embers thought long dead. Fury twisted his face, and with venom he stepped into the center of the hall, his voice flaring like a storm ripping through fragile walls. This is falsehood. This is trickery. She is nothing. But his protestations rang hollow, even to those who had once cheered him. The people's eyes no longer shone with laughter at her expense. They glimmered with awe, with dread, with the unmistakable awareness that they stood within history's turning. And so, he sought to end it by force. He called for the final trial, not a riddle, not a mystery carved in stone, but a spectacle of humiliation that would crush her utterly. Servants obeyed with trembling hands. Before her they laid the tools of mockery, a jester's mask, bells intended for shame, garments designed to turn her into a fool before the court. If she would not be broken by wisdom, she would be broken by ridicule. The crowd wavered, unease thickening the air as they watched. For years, they had joined in that chorus of mockery. They had laughed at her silence, treated it as less than human. Now, faced with the overseer's cruel final measure, that laughter curdled in their throats. What once seemed harmless entertainment now revealed itself as cruelty naked and unmasked. He ordered her to rise, to don the garments, to caper like a creature void of dignity. His voice snapped through the vaulted chamber, commanding her to bend, to yield, to surrender her silence into farce. Slowly, she stood, small, frail, dust clinging to her skin. Yet as she rose from her long stillness, the hush that fell upon the chamber was unlike any before. Even the overseer felt the wrongness of what he had summoned. She lifted the mask in fragile hands, and when her eyes caught the torchlight, something within them glimmered, something no chain of humiliation could bind. The overseer snarled, urging her, his voice nearly breaking. "Do it!" And then, she laughed. Not half, not broken, not restrained. It spilled, sudden and unstoppable, ringing through the chamber like a river bursting its banks. It was not mockery, not rebellion, not cruelty. It was pure, unbidden joy, the sound every law feared, the sound no decree could silence. The overseer staggered back as if struck. Torches flared brighter, pillars seemed to tremble, and the people fell into stunned silence, the irony complete. In a land where laughter was outlaw, her laugh became the loudest sound they had ever heard. The ruler upon the throne bowed his head, not in shame but in resignation, in awe. He rose from his seat, his crown heavy as he stepped down from the dais, and in full view of the crowd he acknowledged the truth. Her silence had been prophecy fulfilled, her laughter the final key that overturned power itself. The overseer screamed his denial, clinging to mockery even as the people turned from him. His fury struck emptiness, his authority drained with every beat of her laugh. A tide had shifted, and even he could not resist it. For centuries, silence was her cage. Now, in an instant, laughter was her throne. And the world, in awe, understood nothing would ever be the same again. When her laughter faded, the hall was not the same place it had been moments before. The sound lingered in stone and air, etched into every listening heart. Where once silence had been oppressive, heavy, and cruel, now it felt sanctified, alive, pregnant with memory of what had broken forth to shatter centuries of control. The overseer stumbled backward, stripped of his performance, his authority devoured by the very eyes that had once worshipped him. His mouth moved with desperate rage, but no one listened. Where his voice had once commanded, it now sounded shrill, pathetic, a hollow echo of power already lost. He was not destroyed, not yet, but worse, he was dismissed, forgotten, a relic of cruelty now too obvious to serve. The ruler, heavy with awe, returned slowly to his throne, but he did not sit. His hands gripped the arms as though clinging to an old world slipping from beneath his grasp. Around him, courtiers whispered, some trembling, others daring to hope. They could not all agree. Was this revelation salvation or ruin? Yet none could deny what they had witnessed. One laugh had undone the unshakable. Outside the hall, word spread as swiftly as wildfire. Messengers rushed without bidding. Voices carried into streets, and whispers became chants. For generations, people had borne silence as law. Now they spoke, hesitantly at first, then bolder. Children mimicked the sound of laughter not to scorn her, but to honor her. Markets rang differently, voices intertwined not in fear, but in secret kinship. Old structures began to tremble. The overseer's allies turned from him, dissolving the web of cruelty that had supported his reign. Priests and judges began to debate, forced to reconsider decrees once thought eternal. A slow shift took root, not revolution in a single stroke, but transformation woven thread by thread. Reform rarely comes with fire. More often, it moves like rivers, carving stone through patience, carving empires through inevitability. And at the heart of it all was she, still silent yet no longer invisible. Her laugh had passed, but its echo lived everywhere, in courtyards, in whispers, in memory. She did not claim throne or crown. No banner bore her name. She returned to her quiet, the same shadow within the hall. But now everyone who passed her saw. Everyone who dared meet her eyes flinched at the truth revealed in their depths. She was no longer cautionary tale. She was living covenant. The overseer did not perish. He walked still, stripped and furious, his hatred smoldering and waiting. His shadow would remain, a reminder that tyranny does not die in a single night. But tyranny had been named, humiliated, cracked. And once cracked, no stone can remain whole. The people sensed it. The ruler sensed it. Even the overseer, in his fury, knew it. The world had shifted, and nothing awaited it now but change. When the uproar settled, when voices dimmed and dust lay still upon the chamber floor, she returned to where she had always been, her place in the shadows. No throne was claimed, no crown was laid upon her brow. She asked for nothing, she demanded nothing, and yet all knew the world was different because of her. In the days that followed, reforms began to stir, hesitant first, like seedlings breaking through hard soil. The empire learned to pause, to reflect, to permit silence not as punishment but as choice. The overseer still walked with bitterness clinging to his every step, whispering venom to those who would listen, but even his words had lost their sting. His name was remembered as cruelty, his legacy as the laughter he could not contain. The ruler himself carried the echo of that day like a stone in his chest. He rarely spoke of it, but those close to him knew. The prophecy haunted him, reshaped him. He governed with unease now, wary of what silence might reveal, careful that every decree did not ring against truth. For once laughter has tasted air, tyranny dares not remain the same. And her? She returned to her place at the pillar's edge, seated again among the dust and shadow. But to look upon her now was different. No child dared mock her. No passerby whispered jeers. They looked instead with quiet reverence, as if standing before the living echo of legend. In the streets, new songs rose, sung in fragments, too fragile to silence. Children laughed freely, and no punishment followed. Market stalls rang with a different kind of noise, chatter rather than command, human rather than imposed. The empire had not shattered, but it had cracked, and into those cracks light seeped like dawn. Still, she remained silent. The laugh had come and gone, a single note etched forever in memory. Yet silence no longer cloaked her as curse. It embraced her as mystery, as proof that even what seems forgotten holds power enough to undo an empire. In years to come, storytellers would gather beneath starlight to recount the day. They told of the silent one who had endured humiliation without falter, who had broken riddles with clarity, unveiled secrets with patience, and finally, with a single laugh, returned truth to the people. Some called her prophet, some called her legend, others called her simply human, and so generations learned. They learned that silence is not absent, that laughter is not foolishness, that the smallest, most disregarded voice can shatter the weight of law and reshape the destiny of all. Her name was never recorded, her throne was never built, yet her story carved itself into memory as surely as stone carves into mountain. And though she never spoke again, never lifted her voice to command or condemn, her laughter still carries, through time, through song, through the breath of children who smile at dusk, through fireside tales whispered long after empire's walls have crumbled. Echoes, eternal, undimmed, a sound no world can ever silence again.